Bloody hell, what an episode! What did you think about this week's episode of My Hero Academia? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below and I'll get back to you shortly. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, subscribe, click the bell and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today, it will do them a power of good. And if we can get to 64 subscribers, I will be doing a playthrough of My Hero 1 Justice for the channel once this season is over. We're very, very close to hitting that goal. Just 2 more subscribers and we can do it. And I'll just say quickly here and now, next week's review is going to be going up a little bit later because I'm getting my second job for you know what. But you know what, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But between then and now, on to the review. Well, Jesus Christ, how horrifying. Well, I think that in future I should watch Spitting Image after My Hero Academia and not the other way around, because this was a really heavy episode, no mistake about it. I'm almost in awe at it, so forgive me if it sounds like I'm repeating myself. I'm not saying that much about it because, my God, what do you say about an episode like this? This is a hallmark episode for this season. It's amazing. It's quite honestly one of the best episodes that we've had, possibly in the entire show's run. It's just horrifying and soul-destroying, and I can't even find the words with which to describe it. But if we are to just address the elephant in the room here slightly when it comes to this episode, is that we all knew that this was going this way. It wasn't because of some kind of fan theory, it's because they literally said a few episodes ago that the hands that Tomura has on his body are from his dead family. So it was only just always going to be a matter of us seeing it in action for us to, you know, just find out how exactly that happened. I admit that kind of the innuendo as to how it happened was, I don't know if it was more effective than what we saw today, but you know what, it was horrific to see it in action. But of course we knew it was all coming, so for the majority of this episode, it was just sat there with me thinking to myself, alright, when are we going to see this happening? When is it going to happen? When do we get to the fireworks factory? And that part of me that was so impatient just got really, incredibly impatient because of just how much talking that Re-Destro did in the fight again. Look, I understand that this is a thing in anime and manga. I understand that. I understand this is someone who isn't quite as connected to all that stuff as many people watching this show are, but I felt that this week was even worse, because at least last week there was stuff that we learned about him and the world itself. This week we didn't quite get that, aside from exactly how his quirk works and confirmation that quirks do influence the personality of the person that has them, which was all neat stuff. It didn't really feel as though it was totally needed. Sure, the overall arc of his conversation, the overall arc of what he was saying, was designed to help create more of a thematic wedge between himself and the Meta Liberation Army and Tomura and the League, for us to just see clearly that even though they have both got dark intent, one is a little bit lighter than the other. I don't want to sound as though I was impatient for most of this episode, because I did enjoy quite a bit of it. It was just a case of that we all knew what was coming. It was just felt like a lot of busy work to get there. Of course, when we do get to the stuff with young Tomura, it was fantastic. Utterly, utterly fantastic and horrifically tragic all around. It was just, my God, Jesus Christ. Just when you think the origin story of Futoga was messed up, this is just the whole other thing. And I suppose this hits harder because you're able to see Tomura just being a normal, excitable kid. And it's something that you can relate to. It's something that you remember being a kid, or it's because you got younger relatives that are like that, and then just seeing how horrible this is. We had a comment last week which discussed this point in the previous video, which I'm going to discuss in a little bit more detail when we get to the comment section, but it just shows that this world, as much as there are these cool superheroes saving the day, there's just some stuff that those heroes can't protect against, and the darker side of human nature is just one of those things. And at the same time, you understood why the father did what he did. He was protective, way too protective, and protected his family in the worst way possible. But you understood why he did it, which makes the whole thing that little bit more tragic. Yet there is an argument to be made that he could have just sat his family down, sat his kids down, and just explained to them, why they can't be heroes, and whilst it may have opened up old emotional wounds for him, it would at the very least not have opened new ones up for his kids. But still, with all that said, it adds a dimension to it, which makes it, again, all the more tragic. I was worried when we were getting into this, when we saw that abusive side of Tomura's father, that we were just going to go down a very cliched and well-worn path of a kid from an abusive family, and it was going to be like the Halloween reboot thing that Rob Zombie did, or like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboots and reimaginings, where we find out that the villain was a tragic case, and it just never feels like it quite lands, because you know the horrific things that they did after that point. And that's a rant for another day, but in this instance, you understood the motivations of everyone involved, and there's a part of you that can see how things could have been different, even with things being the way that they are, and that just adds another element of tragedy to it. Just Tomura's father wanting to make sure he protects his family so they don't get hurt, and then just it all goes horribly, horribly wrong. And there is an interesting element to all of this, which I hope that a lot more people have seen, which is that it's interesting the parallels between Tomura and Eri. You know, it's really fascinating when you think about it. Both of them have abilities that they never really knew about when they first used them, and both those power sets ended up destroying their respective families. Only, you know, both of them ended up finding their way into the grasp of evildoers, both with some kind of agenda for the greater world, and you know, maybe in time, had Eri not been saved, she would have gone down the same route that Tomura did, and maybe had Tomura been found by someone more like our heroes, he wouldn't have turned out the way that he did, and he would have turned out maybe a little bit more like Eri is doing now. It's fascinating, that parallels to just, you can have two characters with such a similar backstory, but both of them end up going in two radically different directions. I hope that that's intentional on the writer's part, to create this duology, to create this mirroring between the two characters. But we'll have to see where all this ends up going with it. I know that, I was starting to go into comment corner here a little bit, but I'll just wrap up what I have to say about the episode as is, and just say it was a fantastic episode. There's very little I can say as to where flaws with it at this point, which would just be nitpicking. Yeah, I do feel that the episode itself took a little bit too long to actually get into the flashback sequences, and this is another case where they could have spent the entire episode wrapped around this origin story, but by the looks of things, it's going to be continuing into next week, which, you know, take it or leave it. I'm not entirely sure this is the best way to actually structure this particular story, but I suppose the argument for doing it like this is that it then doesn't get lost in the rush of the superhero whiz-bang pop shouty times, which is the meat and potatoes of this particular arc for the most part. But still, fantastic episode. I have very little to say about it otherwise. Now it's time for Comment Corner! Our first comment comes from Deku123, which says, "Pretty good ep." And I have to agree, it was a decent episode, was last week's episode. Again, as I seem to say often, it wasn't quite as good as what went before it, or even this week's episode, but still a decent episode all around. Our next pair of comments come from Scott TV Gamer. It's double bubble with them. We've got two comments from them to discuss. First of all, we're discussing about the episode itself, which was, again, wasn't the best of the season, but it was still decent for what it was, and they agree with me that Re-Destro's monologuing went on a little bit too much during the fight, which I felt was, again, the case this week, but you know what, different strokes for different folks. Maybe some people disagree and they thought that his monologuing both last week and this week was perfectly fine. Leave a comment down below. And their second comment is about last week's question for the video. I don't think there's going to be one this week, but the question for last week was, do you think that in the end, once My Hero Academia wraps up, that the heroes or the villains are going to win? Because there was a poll on a fan site which wasn't quite as cut and dry as I thought it was going to be, but still, they say that they believe that in the grand scheme of things, there isn't going to be a clear winner between the heroes and villains, which I do agree with to a degree. I just feel that it's not, I feel that the heroes are going to win, but it's not going to be a clean win. It's going to come at the risk and the loss of some key characters, and they believe that in the end, the series will wrap up with Eri somehow using her quote to erase the world as it is, to revert the world back to a point before quirks starting to appearing. Not good English, but still. I'm not entirely sure about that idea, because there's aspects of the way that the narrative is delivered which makes me feel that that's not going to be the case. I've seen that theory bounced about quite a bit, that somehow Eri is the key to all this, because she's a funnier character that we've ever had before, and if we can get her to working, you know... I feel that whilst it is an interesting idea, I'm not quite sure they'd necessarily do that, but you know, we'll soon see. I have my own theories as to how this all might wrap up, but you know what? That's a topic for another time. And finally, we got Ama, who says that they enjoyed last week's episode with the Twice flashback, and they believe, you know, it just really shows just how cruel and unjust the My Hero Academia world really can be, and that there's a lot of people that simply don't get a second chance. They just get kicked to the curb, and that's something that I do agree with. I feel that one of the traits of this world, which I can't say I really appreciate it per se, because that makes it almost sound like I'm some kind of sociopath, but I can appreciate the fact that we see this happening because it makes the world feel a lot more grounded. There is a temptation with worlds like this for stuff to be a little bit too black and white, and for heroes and villains to be a little bit too clean cut, and in some cases only flawed as far as conventional writing will let them be. And the key thing and the interesting thing with characters the likes of which we see in My Hero Academia is that they are flawed in very believable ways. As we saw with this week with Tomura, it's because he came from an abusive family, but it's an abusive family that wanted to protect him, and in the end it went horribly wrong. And we see that again with Gentle Criminal, and we saw that with La Brava, and we've seen it with Twice. It's a world with people who couldn't become heroes, not because they were necessarily bad, but because of circumstances getting in the way, and as we learnt this week, quirks themselves possibly having an effect on how they did develop. Anyway, that is pretty much it for now. If you have any comments for this week's episode, this week's review, leave them in the comment section down below. I don't really have a question for this particular video. I suppose a big question for this video is, what did you think about the whole origin story stuff with Tomura as we see it? I know we're going to see a little bit more of it next week, but what are your feelings of it so far? Does it get the grade from you? Does it get the thumbs up? Let me know in the comment section down below, and we will read your comments out next week. But anyway, thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!